The autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of room 247 as Michael Anderson arranged the graded test papers on his desk with careful precision. Each paper represented hours of dedication from his students, and the results had exceeded his expectations. He smiled, imagining their faces when they discovered their improved scores in advanced chemistry. The clock read 8:57 a.m., and the hallway buzzed with the familiar sound of teenagers rushing to beat the morning bell. Michael straightened his favorite navy tie, a Father's Day gift from his daughter, and wrote "Congratulations" in bold letters across the whiteboard. This semester's class had worked especially hard to grasp complex molecular structures, and their latest test scores proved their determination. Jenny Martinez was the first to arrive, clutching her worn textbook to her chest. She had struggled early in the semester but stayed after school 3 days a week for extra help. Michael knew her test would show the most improvement. Other students filtered in, filling the room with morning chatter and the shuffle of backpacks being dropped beside desks. "Before we begin today's lesson," Michael announced, picking up the stack of papers, "I want to tell you how proud I am of everyone's progress." The students sat up straighter, anticipation building in their expressions. But before he could distribute the tests, a sharp knock interrupted the moment. 2 officers stood in the doorway, their faces stern and purposeful. Officer Sarah Chen, whom Michael recognized from the school's security programs, avoided his gaze. The male officer, whose badge read Detective Roberts, stepped forward with a document in hand. "Michael Anderson." Detective Roberts's voice cut through the shocked silence. "We need you to come with us." Michael's hands tightened on the test papers, creating small creases in the corners. "There must be some mistake," he said, maintaining his composure for his students' sake. "I'm in the middle of class." "Sir, please step into the hallway," Officer Chen said softly, her discomfort evident. The students watched in stunned silence as Detective Roberts approached Michael's desk. Jenny Martinez stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mr. Anderson helped me study yesterday afternoon. He was here until 6 o'clock. Please remain seated," Detective Roberts instructed, though his voice carried a note of sympathy. He turned to Michael. "You're being arrested in connection with an incident at First Capital Bank. You have the right to remain silent." Michael's mind raced as the detective continued reading his rights. First Capital Bank. He'd never even held an account there. The test papers slipped from his hands, scattering across the floor like autumn leaves. Jenny and several other students jumped up to gather them, but Officer Chen held up her hand, stopping them. "Principal Hayes will be here shortly," Officer Chen announced to the class. "Everyone please remain calm and seated." As Michael was led from the room, he caught a glimpse of his students' faces, confusion, fear, and disbelief painted across each one. Through the growing crowd in the hallway, he saw Jenny pulling out her phone, her hands shaking as she typed. He knew she was messaging their study group, the same group that could vouch for his whereabouts. The walk to the police car felt surreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Students pressed against classroom windows, phones recording the scene. Michael held his head high, trusting that this mistake would be quickly resolved. He had 20 witnesses, security camera footage from the school, and a sign-in log proving he'd been teaching during the supposed incident. What he didn't know then was that a flawed facial recognition system was about to change his life, challenging not just his freedom, but the very system meant to protect justice. Detective Lisa Martinez sat alone in the evidence room, surrounded by towers of case files that needed digitizing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she sipped her third coffee of the evening. As the newest detective in the department, she'd drawn the short straw for this tedious assignment. But Lisa believed every case, no matter how small, deserved attention to detail. Her eyes burned as she scanned another security footage file, this one from a convenience store robbery last month. The timestamp caught her attention. 5:45 p.m., September 15th. Something about that date tugged at her memory. She pulled up the department's case database on her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she searched recent convictions. There it was. The first Capital Bank case, the one that had put that high school teacher behind bars. Same day, same time. Lisa remembered watching the news coverage, seeing the students protesting outside the courthouse. She'd been too busy with her own cases to follow it closely, but something had felt off about the whole thing. The convenience store footage played on her screen, showing a clear view of the street outside. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips as she noticed something in the background. Through the window of the tutoring center across the street, she could see people moving inside. Lisa leaned closer, squinting at the grainy image. She pulled up the facial recognition report from the bank case on her second monitor. "This can't be right," she muttered, rewinding the footage. The timestamp matched perfectly with the bank robbery. And there, clearly visible through the tutoring center window, was Michael Anderson working with his students. The same Michael Anderson who was supposedly robbing a bank 3 miles away at that exact moment. Lisa's heart raced as she dug deeper into the case files. The facial recognition system had matched Anderson to the bank's security footage with 99.1% certainty. But looking at the convenience store video, she could see him in 2 places at once. One of these had to be wrong. She grabbed her phone, fingers hovering over her supervisor's number. Detective Brooks had been clear. The case was closed, the evidence solid, the conviction secure. He brushed off her questions about the facial recognition system's accuracy rates last week, telling her to focus on her own cases. The evidence room door creaked open, making Lisa jump. Officer Chen walked in, carrying another box of files. She paused when she saw Lisa's expression. "Everything okay?" Chen asked, setting down the box. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Lisa hesitated. Chen had been at the school during Anderson's arrest. She'd mentioned feeling uneasy about it during their lunch breaks. "Sarah, that teacher you arrested, did he really seem like someone who'd rob a bank?" Chen's face darkened. "Honestly, no. He was helping some student with chemistry when we walked in. The kid even had the worksheet to prove it." She moved closer, lowering her voice. But the facial recognition match was nearly perfect. Brooks said it was impossible to argue with that kind of evidence. Lisa turned her laptop, showing Chen the convenience store footage. What if it wasn't impossible? What if the system made a mistake? Chen's eyes widened as she watched the video. "That's him. Same day as the robbery." When Lisa nodded, Chen pulled up a chair. "Show me everything you found." As they pored over the evidence together, Lisa's mind raced with possibilities. If the facial recognition system could be wrong about this, what else had it been wrong about? But proving it would mean challenging not just her department, but the entire justice system's growing reliance on artificial intelligence. Lisa saved the video file to her personal drive, then made a copy for Chen. They had stumbled onto something bigger than a single wrongful conviction, and Lisa knew her next steps would either make her career or break it entirely. Judge Robert Collins adjusted his tie as he walked through the bustling school gymnasium, now transformed into a maze of trifold display boards for the annual science fair. His grandson Tommy had begged him to come, proud of his project on renewable energy. After 30 years on the bench, Collins welcomed these moments of normalcy, away from the weight of life-changing decisions. "Grandpa, you have to see this one." Tommy tugged at his sleeve, pulling him toward a display that stood out from the others. Its title read "The Hidden Biases in Facial Recognition Technology." The presenter, a teenage girl with bright eyes and determination in her stance, looked familiar. Jenny Martinez. She introduced herself, then hesitated. "I was Mr. Anderson's student." The name hit Collins like a physical blow. Michael Anderson. The case had seemed so straightforward 3 months ago. The facial recognition evidence had been compelling, the prosecution confident. But something in Jenny's voice made him pause. "Our research shows that current facial recognition systems have a 35% higher error rate in certain lighting conditions," Jenny explained, pointing to her data charts. "We tested 5 leading systems, including FaceTrace, the one used by local law enforcement. Collins studied the detailed graphs, his judicial mind clicking into gear. These error rates, they're documented. Yes, sir. Jenny pulled up research papers on her tablet. Mr. Anderson taught us to always verify our sources. That's why this is so wrong. He's in prison because no one checked the system's accuracy. Tommy, who had been bouncing impatiently, suddenly grew serious. Grandpa, isn't that the kind of computer thing you use in court? The question struck deeper than his grandson could know. Collins had relied on face trace evidence in dozens of cases, viewing its results as nearly infallible. He'd even dismissed defense arguments about its reliability in Anderson's case, seeing them as desperate tactics. After congratulating Tommy on his own project, Collins found himself walking to his car in a daze. He pulled out his phone, dialing his clerk. "James, I need you to pull everything we have on the Anderson case and get me the technical specifications for the face trace system, particularly any studies on error rates." That evening, surrounded by case files in his home office, Collins discovered what he should have seen months ago. The bank's security cameras had captured the robbery at dusk, when shadows and artificial lighting created exactly the conditions Jenny's research had flagged as problematic. His computer chimed with an email from James. More cases had emerged where face trace evidence had been central to convictions. Collins thought of Anderson in his classroom, teaching students to question and verify. The irony was painful. A framed photo on his desk caught his eye. Himself at Tommy's age, accepting a science fair ribbon. He'd become a judge to serve justice, to protect truth. Somewhere along the way, he'd started trusting technology more than human experience. Collins reached for his phone again, this time calling the district attorney's office. He needed to know if anyone else had raised concerns about the Anderson case. The voice that answered belonged to Detective Lisa Martinez. "Judge Collins," she said, sounding surprised but somehow also relieved. "I was actually hoping to speak with you about Michael Anderson." As Lisa began sharing her discoveries about the convenience store footage, Collins felt the pieces falling into place. He opened his laptop and began typing. Motion to review case 2024 CR 789, State versus Anderson. Technology might have helped create this injustice, but it could also help correct it. Looking at Tommy's science fair photo next to the case files, Collins knew that sometimes the greatest wisdom came from being willing to learn from the youngest minds. Detective Lisa Martinez spread her research across the university lab's conference table, surrounded by cutting-edge facial recognition equipment. Dr. James Chen, a former student of Michael Anderson and now a leading researcher in AI technology, studied the bank's security footage on his high-resolution monitor. The system's confidence rating was artificially high. Dr. Chen explained, adjusting his glasses. "Look at these shadow patterns around the facial features. The algorithm struggles with this type of contrast, but instead of flagging it as uncertain, it overcompensates." Lisa nodded, adding another note to her growing file. Over the past week, she had discovered 7 other cases where face traces evidence played a crucial role in convictions. Each case involved similar lighting conditions during dusk or dawn hours. Her phone buzzed. A message from Officer Chen. Another case had surfaced, this time from 2 years ago. A college student wrongly identified at a metro station who spent 8 months in jail before being cleared by an alibi witness. The system's core algorithm, Dr. Chen continued, pulling up lines of code, was trained primarily on well-lit front-facing photos. But real-world conditions are messy. Shadows, angles, motion blur, they all affect accuracy. He paused, looking at an old photo on his desk, showing Michael Anderson at his graduation. "Mr. Anderson taught us to question results that seemed too perfect. The irony isn't lost on me." A knock at the lab door made them both turn. Jenny Martinez stood there, clutching her science fair project materials. "Dr. Chen, I brought the error rate data you asked for." She hesitated, seeing Lisa. "Detective Martinez, are you here about Mr. Anderson?" Lisa smiled warmly. "We all are. Your science fair project helped spark this investigation. want to help us dig deeper. For the next hour, they cross-referenced Jenny's research with Dr. Chen's analysis. Jenny's fresh perspective helped them identify patterns they'd missed. The facial recognition system showed consistently higher error rates during specific conditions: low light, rapid movement, and certain camera angles. Lisa's phone rang. Judge Collins. "Detective, I've just signed the motion to review, but we need more than just technical doubts. We need to prove the system's fundamental flaws." "Working on it, Your Honor," Lisa replied, watching Jenny and Dr. Chen compare datasets. "We found a pattern of misidentification cases. The system's design has built-in biases that nobody questioned because the confidence ratings looked so convincing." A notification popped up on Dr. Chen's computer, an email from a colleague at another university. Similar cases had emerged in other cities using face trace technology. The problem wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Jenny suddenly straightened up. "Look at this," she said, pointing to her timeline. The bank robbery happened at 5:45 p.m. in mid-September. Sunset was at 5:38 that day. The security camera was pointing west, directly into the setting sun. Dr. Chen quickly pulled up the original footage. The system would have been dealing with extreme backlighting. In these conditions, its confidence ratings are meaningless. Lisa felt a surge of hope. They weren't just finding doubts. They were uncovering proof of a deeply flawed system that had been trusted blindly by the entire justice system. Her phone buzzed again. Officer Chen had located the convenience store's original security footage, showing Michael teaching during the robbery. With the judge's motion approved, they could now officially reopen the case. "Send everything to my office," Lisa told Dr. Chen and Jenny. "We're not just going to prove Mr. Anderson's innocence. We're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." As she gathered her files, Lisa noticed Jenny adding a new section to her science fair project: how technology and truth work together. Sometimes, she realized, justice needed both the wisdom of experience and the courage of youth to find its way. The school auditorium buzzed with energy as hundreds of students from neighboring districts gathered for what they called the Truth in Technology Summit. Jenny Martinez stood at the podium, her science fair project now transformed into a comprehensive presentation. Behind her, a giant screen displayed the hashtag #VerifyThanTrust, which had gained over 1 million impressions in just 3 days. "Mr. Anderson taught us that science isn't just about getting the right answer," Jenny began, her voice steadied despite her nerves. "It's about questioning how we got that answer. When technology tells us something is 99% certain, we need to ask about the 1%. In the front row, Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly while recording the presentation for his university's research archive. Beside him, representatives from 3 major tech companies took notes, their interest piqued by the students' compelling data on facial recognition failures. The presentation screen shifted to show video clips from Mr. Anderson's classroom. Students shared stories of how he'd helped them overcome their fears of science, taught them to think critically, and encouraged them to question everything, even him. Each testimony painted a picture of a teacher who embodied the very principles that could have prevented his wrongful conviction. "Last week, our website received over 50,000 visits," Jenny continued, pulling up the analytics. "We've heard from people across the country who were wrongly identified by facial recognition systems. Their stories match the pattern we've discovered." Sarah Chen, a senior who had interned at a local tech startup, took the stage next. She demonstrated a simulator they'd created showing how different lighting conditions affected facial recognition accuracy. The audience gasped as they watched the system's confidence ratings fluctuate wildly with minor changes in angle and lighting. Meanwhile, outside the auditorium, local news crews interviewed students who had organized study sessions in Mr. Anderson's teaching style. They explained how their Verify the Truth workshops had spread to 20 other schools, teaching students and parents alike about the importance of questioning automated systems. Detective Martinez, watching from the back of the auditorium, received a text from Judge Collins. "Tech company CEOs are watching the live stream. They'd want to help. She smiled, knowing the students' movement had accomplished something her official investigation alone couldn't. It had made the issue impossible to ignore. The presentation reached its climax as Jenny revealed their most powerful finding yet. The students had created a database of similar cases nationwide, identifying a pattern of wrongful identifications that followed sunset times throughout the year. Their data showed how the system's accuracy plummeted during specific atmospheric conditions. "We're not just fighting for Mr. Anderson anymore," Jenny concluded, her voice growing stronger. "We're fighting for everyone who might face this same injustice. Technology should help truth, not hide it." As applause filled the auditorium, Dr. Chen's phone lit up with notifications. 3 major AI companies had issued statements announcing reviews of their facial recognition systems. A prominent tech magazine wanted to feature the students' research in their next cover story. Outside, more students arrived carrying signs with QR codes linking to their evidence website. Each visitor who scanned the code saw not just data and statistics, but stories, hundreds of personal accounts from students, parents, and community members who knew the real Michael Anderson. Detective Martinez felt her phone buzz again. Judge Collins had texted, "Their movement just accomplished in days what might have taken us months in court. Sometimes the best way to change the system is to show everyone why it needs to change." As the students gathered for a group photo, their phones held high displaying the #VerifyThenTrust#, Jenny realized they had done more than just fight for justice. They had started a revolution in how society views technological evidence. Mr. Anderson would have been proud of that lesson most of all. The courthouse's main hearing room had never been so full. Judge Collins surveyed the crowd from his bench, noting the mix of students, tech experts, and media representatives. Michael Anderson sat with his attorney, his posture straight, but his hands clasped tightly in his lap. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a moment that would reshape how the justice system used technology. Dr. Chen approached the stand, carrying a laptop and a small device. "Your Honor, we've recreated the exact conditions from the day of the bank robbery." He set up a demonstration screen visible to the entire room. "What you're about to see is how Face Trace processes images during sunset hours." The screen came to life, showing 2 identical photos of a face. The image on the left was taken in normal daylight. The right shows the same person at sunset, the same time as the bank robbery. Dr. Chen pressed a button, and the system analyzed both images. Gasps filled the room as the results appeared. The daylight photo correctly identified the subject with 85% confidence. The sunset photo matched the same person to 5 different individuals in the database, each with over 90% confidence. The system's certainty ratings, Dr. Chen explained, are fundamentally flawed during specific lighting conditions. It's not just wrong, it's confidently wrong. Detective Martinez stepped forward next, presenting her findings. "We've identified 23 cases in our district alone where sunset hour facial recognition evidence led to convictions." She placed a thick folder on the evidence table. Each case followed the same pattern we found in Mr. Anderson's conviction. The prosecutor, who had originally tried Anderson's case, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Your Honor, we can't simply dismiss technological evidence because it isn't perfect. The system's overall accuracy rate." Actually, Jenny interrupted from her seat in the gallery, earning a stern but understanding look from Judge Collins. "We can show you exactly why we can." She quickly made her way to the front, tablet in hand. "Our research team compiled every face trace analysis conducted during sunset hours in the past year." Judge Collins nodded, allowing her to continue. Jenny connected her tablet to the display screen, pulling up a detailed calendar. The system's error rate jumps from 2% to 37% during these specific light conditions. That's not imperfect. That's unusable. The hearing continued as expert after expert testified about the system's flaws. A former face trace developer revealed that the company had noticed the sunset hour anomalies during testing, but classified them as edge cases, unlikely to affect real-world usage. As the day progressed, Judge Collins noticed something remarkable. The conversation had shifted from proving Anderson's innocence to preventing future mistakes. Tech company representatives in the gallery took notes, their phones buzzing with messages from concerned executives. "The court has heard enough," Judge Collins finally announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. "We're not just examining one case today. We're confronting our own overconfidence in technology that we didn't fully understand." He turned to Michael Anderson. "Mr. Anderson, your students' dedication to scientific truth has exposed flaws that we, the justice system, should have caught. Their commitment to verification before trust, a principle you taught them, has revealed a systemic issue that affects countless lives." Judge Collins straightened his papers, preparing to deliver his ruling. But before he could speak, the prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, in light of the evidence presented, the state moves to vacate Mr. Anderson's conviction immediately. Moreover, we request a review of all cases involving facial recognition evidence." The gallery erupted in muffled cheers. Jenny and her classmates hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. Dr. Chen nodded in satisfaction, already planning improvements to facial recognition technology based on what they'd learned. Judge Collins raised his gavel, but paused, looking at the young faces in his courtroom. In their pursuit of justice for their teacher, these students had taught the justice system itself an invaluable lesson. Sometimes the most important evidence wasn't what technology told you, but what it failed to tell you. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Michael Anderson straightened his tie, the same one he'd worn the day of his arrest. Today, however, the hallways buzzed with a different energy. News crews set up their equipment while students filled the benches, many wearing blue ribbons with "Verify Then Trust" printed in silver letters. Judge Collins entered his chambers early, finding Detective Martinez already waiting with a stack of files. "We've identified 57 cases nationwide that need immediate review," she reported, her voice steady but her eyes bright with purpose. "Tech companies are sending teams to help us re-examine the evidence." The main courtroom filled quickly. Dr. Chen sat with his research team, their laptops displaying real-time updates from facial recognition companies implementing new safety protocols. Jenny Martinez and her classmates occupied the front row, their science fair project now transformed into a comprehensive manual for technology verification in legal proceedings. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Judge Collins took the bench. Today marks not just the correction of a single error, but the beginning of a new approach to justice in the digital age. He looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Anderson, please rise." Michael stood, supported by the quiet strength of his student's presence. Judge Collins continued, "This court officially vacates your conviction, but more importantly, we acknowledge that your case has transformed our understanding of technological evidence." The judge held up a document. "I hold here new guidelines, developed in collaboration with technical experts and legal scholars. From this day forward, no facial recognition evidence will be admissible without rigorous verification under various environmental conditions." Detective Martinez watched from her seat as Michael's students tried to contain their joy. She remembered her own doubts when she first discovered the evidence, how close they'd come to missing this injustice entirely. Her department had already begun implementing mandatory technology verification training. Furthermore, Judge Collins announced, the court recognizes the extraordinary contributions of the student research team. He gestured to Jenny and her classmates. Their dedication to scientific truth and justice has led to the creation of the Student Technology Ethics Council, which will advise courts on the proper use of artificial intelligence in legal proceedings. Michael finally allowed himself to smile, remembering all the times he'd told his students that science wasn't just about finding answers. It was about asking the right questions. Now those same lessons had helped free him and would protect countless others. The prosecutor, who had originally tried Michael's case, approached with an unexpected request. "Mr. Anderson, we're establishing a new department focusing on technology verification in criminal cases. We need advisors who understand both the science and its human impact. Would you consider joining us?" Before Michael could respond, Judge Collins made one final announcement. Let the record show that this case has initiated a nationwide review of all convictions based primarily on facial recognition evidence. We've already received support from major tech companies and legal organizations to fund this effort. The courtroom erupted in applause as Michael hugged Jenny and his other students. Dr. Chen approached with news that 3 universities had requested to use their research in developing new AI ethics courses. Detective Martinez smiled, knowing that her initial discovery had sparked a movement larger than she could have imagined. As reporters gathered for statements, Michael noticed Officer Chen in the back of the courtroom. She gave him a quiet nod, remembering her own doubts on the day of his arrest. Sometimes, he realized, justice needed both technology and humanity, and the wisdom to know when to trust each one. The students gathered around their teacher for a photo, their blue ribbons gleaming in the morning light. Above them, carved into the courthouse wall, the words "equal justice under law" seemed to shine with renewed meaning. Technology might make mistakes, but human determination to find the truth could always correct them. 2 years later, room 247 looked different. Smart screens lined the walls, displaying real-time examples of AI analysis alongside traditional chemistry formulas. Michael Anderson moved between lab stations, watching his students work on their latest project, using artificial intelligence to identify chemical compounds while understanding its limitations. Remember, he said, picking up a familiar blue ribbon from his desk, technology is a tool, not the truth itself. The Verify Then Trust motto had evolved from a hashtag into a nationwide educational movement, with Michael's classroom serving as its epicenter. Jenny Martinez, now a freshman at MIT studying computer science and ethics, appeared on one of the screens via video call. The new verification protocols we developed are being implemented in police departments across the country, she reported proudly. And guess what? False identification rates have dropped by 89%. Michael smiled, remembering how his former student's science fair project had grown into a revolutionary approach to technological evidence. The presentation she'd given in his classroom 2 years ago now formed the foundation of a mandatory course for law enforcement officials. A knock at the door drew everyone's attention. Judge Collins entered, followed by Detective Martinez and Dr. Chen. The trio had become regular visitors, part of a unique program that brought legal professionals into classrooms to share real-world applications of scientific principles. Your student's latest research paper is making waves, Judge Collins announced, holding up a tablet. The Supreme Court just cited it in their ruling on AI evidence standards. He turned to the class. You're not just learning science, you're shaping how it's used in society. The students beamed with pride. Their latest project involved developing a system to identify potential biases in AI algorithms before they could affect real-world decisions. 3 tech companies had already expressed interest in implementing their methodology. Detective Martinez, now heading the department's technology verification unit, shared her own update. Remember that database you all helped create? We've used it to review over 500 cases nationwide. 15 wrongful convictions have been overturned. She smiled at Michael. Your lesson about questioning perfect answers saved more lives than you know. Dr. Chen stepped forward, setting up a demonstration of the latest facial recognition technology, now with built-in safeguards inspired by the students' research. When we first exposed the system's flaws, companies saw it as a crisis, he explained. Now they see it as an opportunity to build better, more ethical technology. The bell rang, but nobody moved. Judge Collins had one more announcement. The governor signed it this morning, he said, handing Michael an official document. The Anderson Act is now law. Every state must verify AI evidence using the protocols you all helped develop. As students gathered their things, Michael noticed a small plaque being installed outside his classroom. It read, "Home of the Verify Then Trust movement, where science and justice learn from each other." Below it hung a framed copy of the original science fair project that had started it all. Later that evening, as Michael graded papers, he found a note from one of his students. "Mr. Anderson, Today I questioned a result that seemed too perfect, just like you taught us. Turns out the AI made a mistake in my favor. It would have given me a higher grade than I deserved. 2 years ago, I might have stayed quiet. But you taught us that true science means being honest, even when it's harder. Michael pinned the note next to his blue ribbon, understanding that his greatest legacy wasn't just teaching science or exposing flaws in a system. It was showing that when knowledge meets integrity, justice naturally follows. Outside his window, the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, the same conditions that had once led to his wrongful conviction. But now, those challenging lighting conditions served as a reminder. Sometimes, the most important breakthroughs come from questioning what we think we know for certain.